Will it be shaken or stirred? It's your choice this week on Motoring 2000.
TSN's Motoring 2000 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
You're watching some scenes from the latest James Bond movie, The World Is Not Enough. And while James had an eye for the lady, he also loved his cars and drove many over the years, from an Aston Martin to an AMC Hornet hatchback. Well, BMW got its foot or its tire in the door in the 1995 Bond movie GoldenEye when he drove a Z3. Well, in the latest movie, he gets behind the wheel of BMW's latest sports rocket, the Z8. And this is one of only 2 prototypes used in the actual movie, and we'll tell you more about this car later on. But first, we're going to meet some people who, like James, love cars, but they're dedicated to bringing the past back to life.
We formed the company about 10 years ago because we were interested in restoring old cars. And it was started in a 2-car garage beside the house with a bunch of guys who were all pretty good restorers. And it started out as a guild, and communism doesn't work, so we gradually moved into it being a corporation, which does actually work. We maintain a staff of 10 or 12, and we've got 22,000 square feet, and they're usually working on 10 to 15 projects at a time. The cars in the showroom, most of them are for sale, and they're consignment pieces. People phone us up and bring in cars, and we take a 10% commission on the car. So that works well for us because we don't have money invested in the cars themselves, and it works well for both the buyer and seller because everybody knows exactly what's going on. Nobody thinks that, well, 80,000, I'll bet they only got it for 40 and they're trying to double their money. You know, so it's been a really effective way of doing business, and plus it keeps a good turnover. We always have fresh cars, everything from the interesting muscle cars all the way back to, you know, something like that 1906 Queen. The most time-consuming and most expensive project we've ever worked on is the Type 59 Bugatti. It was took about $400,000 and another $250,000 US in parts to put the car together. That was quite some project. This, geez, it must have come in about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. The client had owned it for about 20 years and had it not on the road for quite a while. She was really rusty, she was painted red, had white shag carpets in it, and was just basically stock with a few little odds and ends done to it. He had done quite well in life, and he had decided that he wanted the ultimate 50 Merc. So he said, I want a 50 Merc, and I want it to look like a 50 Merc, but I don't want any parts on it to be a 50 Merc. The interior of this car took almost 3 years to fully put together, and this is actually the second interior. The first was an interim, just so the owner could have some fun with the car. This was always the grand plan. It was done with an Art Deco theme. There's a lot of polished aluminum. The skins are all done in very high-grade leather. We don't have any common use parts in the interior. Everything is basically handmade in the shop. We have a rear-facing camera system instead of a back window. We have all handmade instruments and controls. There's little jewels that light up, and these all control different systems in the car. The one car part that we did use from something else was this shifter handle is actually the crank handle off a Type 35 Bugatti, which we did as sort of a little bit of a joke. Part of every 50s car, especially a custom car, has got to be the cruiser skirts and the bubble skirts and blister skirts and all that kind of thing. I didn't want, we wanted something to that effect, but I didn't want to go with just an add-on fender skirt, so we closed it all the way in. We made a couple of slots so that you could see the custom wheels, and then of course, if you got a flat tire, you had to have access, so what we did was this. The worst thing you can restore a car for is to use it for a summer and then try to sell it, because you'll never get your money out. You don't really want to be working on a car that has been worked on or badly restored by people who didn't know what they were doing, because you end up pulling your hair out. I would much rather get a car that's been sitting in a field for 60 years, rotting quietly into the ground, than get one that's come to me with a bad paint job and an even worse restoration, because you just don't know where the heck to start.
Pretty nice truck, eh? Now, is it a Chevrolet or a GMC? Does anybody care? That's coming up later on Kenzie's Corner.
All right. I'm getting eaten alive down here, man.
With what? Mosquitoes?
I don't know. Whatever it is, I don't like it.
You know, there were two things that primarily bailed Subaru out of the proverbial soup. The first was picking Paul Hogan as their pitchman. The second was the advent of Outbacking. On this edition of Test Drive, we take a look at the second generation Outback, a vehicle that has changed radically. The new look is of a bigger, bulkier vehicle than the previous car. The squarish heavy-set nose, horizontally split headlights and large fog lights add a more substantial look. That said, the Armco-like treatment of the side cladding is a little over the top. While the new 2.5-litre engine retains the size, look and boxer layout of the previous motor, virtually none of the parts are interchangeable. It now uses a high-lift single overhead cam as opposed to two cams. As a result, the motor breathes appreciably better at the lower part of the rev range, meaning more of the 166 pound-feet of torque and 165 horsepower show up for work in the everyday range. True to boxer law, however, the engine still sounds a little gruff and has an idle quality that cannot match most conventional engines. Inside, the Outback comes fully loaded. Power locks, windows, mirrors, power heated seats and a superb radio CD cassette combination that'll hold 6 CDs. The seats are nicely contoured, well padded and delivered support over the long haul. As has become a Subaru norm, the controls are placed in an inverted L, meaning everything is well within your normal line of sight and therefore easily accessed. The lone sore spot with the interior is the placement of the heated seats. When you get in, there's a tendency to put your hand on the center console to brace yourself. When you do that, you invariably turn one of the seat heaters on. On a dark, dank winter's day, no problem. On a hot, humid one, it most certainly is. Moving the switches from here and putting them up on the dash would eliminate this rather warming problem. All Outbacks are offered with either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic. While the former makes better use of the power, it's the automatic that's the unit of choice. And no, not because it's easier to drive. Under normal circumstances, the automatic version of this Outback splits the power 60-40 in favour of the front wheels. However, because they monitor throttle application, if you mat the gas pedal, the centre differential automatically locks, splitting the power 50-50. But because this happens before the power arrives, you minimise wheel spin. However, on a beautifully sunny day like today, the front wheels do about 80% of the work, improving fuel economy. The thing that blends Subaru's all-wheel drive system into the car so well is not so much the system, but the vehicle in its entirety. The boxer engine lowers the vehicle's centre of gravity, and as the whole system is symmetrical and revolves around the centre line of the vehicle, there's no need for a conventional transfer case. While some suggest that all-wheel drive simply serves to get you stuck further from home, the reality of the situation is that it can transform a nasty drive into a bearable one. The most common problem is that all-wheel drive vehicles are overdriven. Every car is subject to the laws of physics, especially when it comes to braking and turning. However, if you take advantage of all-wheel drive, it reduces wheel spin, improves stability and balance. And that's got to be a good thing. To ensure all the power is relayed to the road in an efficient manner, the Outback features a new multi-link rear suspension, the whole lot being bolted to a floating subframe to reduce noise, vibration and harshness. Up front are McPherson struts. Generally the design, while a little stiff, delivers a decent ride. Complementing the overall feel is a steering setup that's about the right weight, linear, and it delivers decent feedback. Stopping power comes from a top-notch 4-channel, 4-sensor, 4-wheel anti-lock brake system. Dropping the anchor has the desired effect, although the pedal could do with being a little less spongy, something I've noticed with many a Subaru. The Outback differs from most of its sport utility competition in as much as it does manage to combine a degree of sportiness with the required utility. The 60/40 split folding rear seats and wagon taking care of that aspect. It also delivers a passenger car-like ride. All in all, it offers a very intriguing alternative to the average mall assault vehicle.
The second-generation Hyundai Accent is the newest member to Motoring's long-term fleet. The original Accent debuted in 1995 and was an instant success. For 2000, the Accent is all new from the ground up. Over the next few months, we'll find out if the Accent will continue to be a favorite in the subcompact market.
The Mercedes M-Class has been acclaimed.
Recently, Mercedes-Benz ran a series of newspaper and TV ads on the M-Class, but it had nothing to do with the vehicle's performance.
We're very happy to report that the IIHS, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, conducted some fairly elaborate tests, 64 kilometer per hour offset crash test, which is probably the most dangerous kind of environment for crash tests, with 15 compact sport utilities, and the M-Class came out shining colors. In fact, it rated the best in its class. So we're very happy about those kinds of results, and we're communicating that to the marketplace. There's popular perception out there from the consumers in general that sport utilities are safe, which they are. They're bigger, there's a lot of sheet metal, but at the end of the day, it depends on how well they perform in extreme situations. And we have a story to tell, and it's become a very strong focus of our marketing communication program.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns cleaning an area of the car that most people never think of, and that's the air intake plenum for your heating and air conditioning system. There's usually some sort of a screen protecting that area, but in the fall, a lot of leafy debris can completely mat and cover that section of the car to the point where you don't get adequate airflow into the heater. In most cases, the easiest way to clean it is simply with a shop vac to get that debris out of there, especially if it's fine stuff like pine needles. In any case, get in the habit of checking that area and cleaning it on a regular basis. You'll eliminate a lot of odors because that area can get saturated and become a real sodden mess. And if anything gets past that screen and into the heating system, quite often the heater fan blades will actually interfere with a leaf, and you'll actually hear it making an annoying noise in there. You'll eliminate that as well by cleaning that area. That's your Midas tip of the week.
The World Is Not Enough is the latest James Bond movie, and the BMW Z8 is the company's newest rocket.
Well, it's the third time we really have been with James Bond. So it's a long-lasting relationship with Her Majesty's Secret Service. We first, 1995, had the Z3 on the program, the Golden Eye that was, then Tomorrow Never Dies with a cruiser motorcycle and the 750, and now with the Z8 in The World Is Not Enough. Well, this is one of two cars that have been built for the James Bond movie. So this is the actual car Pierce Brosnan drove in. It's handmade, and it's a movie prop. Well, the James Bond, Tomorrow Never Dies, we provided 7 series, and he drove that in the movie by means of a little mobile phone, and he had a remote control in there. In the movie itself, they shot it with somebody sitting in the back of the car, with driving it by wires, and they ran a couple of cars until he knew how to work the whole thing. And then they had a scene where it jumped from the park garage down to the Avis shop, and that took like 3 cars.
Congratulations on a safe journey.
Well, we got asked by MGM, so it's a good thing for us, and we never pay for any product placement. So it's all for free for BMW, really. We supply the cars for free, so that's an investment, but we never, that's a corporate policy, we never pay for product placement.
First, your new car, BMW.
For sales, that is a big deal. The Z3 is the best sold roadster in the world. The 750 is the best sold 12-cylinder in the world, and we hope that the Z8 is going to be a big shot too.
Under the hood in the Z8 is the same V8 engine found in the M5 with 400 horsepower. Now, if you want to get one, you better get in line, because we're talking a limited edition, 50 cars per year over the next 4 years in Canada. The price, well, it hasn't been announced yet, but we're guessing around $200,000, give or take 10 grand. And I know just the man who'll be rushing down to his BMW showroom, and that, of course, is Bill Gardner.
Not a chance, Brad. You're talking about a guy that's so stingy, I spend a couple of weeks agonizing over a $1,000 car until somebody else buys it out from under me. Anyhow, what I want to talk about this week is an information sensor that's found on a lot of cars with electronic fuel injection, and that's the mass airflow sensor. Now, not all cars have this, but a whole lot of cars with EFI or electronic fuel injection use this sensor, and it's an important input to the engine's computer, and the computer bases its fuel calculations to a great deal on information from the mass airflow sensor. Now, all the air that enters the engine has to pass by the mass airflow sensor, and the airflow sensor comes up with an airflow reading in grams per second that the computer can read and decide just how much fuel to inject into that engine to get the ideal 14.7 to 1 air-fuel ratio. Here's the airflow sensor on this 3800 Buick V6. One simple wiring harness connection to unplug it. I've already removed the 3 screws from the airflow sensor, and we can just wiggle it off the throttle body assembly right there, and you can have a look at the sensor. You can see a couple of tiny, minute little filaments there. And the way this sensor works is that with increasing airflow into the engine, the greater the airflow into the engine, the greater the cooling effect that there is across those 2 wires. And the computer in the car applies a voltage to those filaments, and then it looks for feedback to determine what the airflow was in the engine. Now, it's a fairly complicated explanation as to how this thing interrelates with the computer, but suffice it to say that information from this sensor is an important input to the computer on its fuel calculations. Now, the 2 filaments in those sensors, about the only thing that ever goes wrong with these things is that sometimes those filaments get covered with a little bit of carbon and need to be cleaned off. Now, the manufacturers tell you that you can't service or clean these things, but we found out in practice that on high mileage vehicles, we sometimes have to take injector cleaner, hold the sensor like this, and spray these 2 filaments to clean them off. But in most cases, when this part goes bad, 99% of the time, you're getting your wallet out and buying a new one. And I wonder what that thing costs on a $200,000 car, but on a run-of-the-mill grocery getter like this, $300 to $700 isn't out of the ordinary for one of these sensors. They can be pretty pricey. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2000.
If you're big into cars, check out motoringtv.com. And while you're at it, download a copy of Autopilot. Autopilot software searches out the matches to your automotive interest and makes the most of your online time.
You know, our parents and grandparents had it easy when it came to choosing a car. You basically had 3 choices: General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and within each family, 3, 4, or 5 different cars to pick from. The theory was, you started with something like a Chevrolet, and then as your prospects improved as you got older, you'd work your way up the ladder through Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and Buick, till you finally reached the pinnacle of Cadillac. The idea was to maintain brand loyalty, keep people within the family. But then in the 60s, we started getting a lot of imports coming in, dozens and dozens of new brands, and a lot of that loyalty went out the window. Still, some car companies are trying to establish that by building a different car for every possible demographic slice. Now, I once asked Rick Wagoner, the president of General Motors, if this wasn't kind of wasteful. And he said, well, if we can keep the underneath bits roughly the same to keep costs down and make the exterior and interior different, we can appeal to different people without costing us a whole lot of money, so it's a strategic advantage. But now some companies are starting to cut brands. I mean, Chrysler has dropped Plymouth brand in Canada and now in the States as well. And they're trying to consolidate around the Chrysler brand name for their passenger cars. The advantage this has to them is that something like the Chrysler Caravan will now be the best-selling car in Canada because half of the sales will no longer be counted as Plymouth Voyagers. Plymouth Voyager, Dodge Caravan. Who knew the difference and who cared? And now General Motors has done something even stranger. They've taken one of the best brand names in the business, the Suburban, and said, well, Suburban now is only a Chevrolet. The GMC version is going to be called the Yukon XL. Does anybody know what a Yukon XL is? That's part of GM's plan to make GMC a luxury truck brand. Geez, when I think of GMC, I think of a cement mixer at a construction site. Does this all mean anything to anybody? And then you got all the companies that are buying each other out. Ford's bought Jaguar and Aston Martin and Volvo. Volkswagen's bought, well, they bought everybody. They bought Skoda, Seat, they bought Lamborghini, they bought Bugatti. Volkswagen and Bugatti, what kind of sense does that make? I don't know. It's getting so complicated. I mean, it's supposed to be my business to figure this stuff out. And if I'm confused, what's the average consumer supposed to think? I'm Jim Campbell.
This is the 2000 Chevy Venture. Doesn't look much different than last year's model, except this year, for about an extra 10 grand, General Motors is offering a brand new model known as the Warner Brothers Edition. And it's identified by badges sporting the world's most famous carrot-eating bunny. Inside, like the Oldsmobile Silhouette, they've got the Video Entertainment Center, so you can watch a movie, listen to the radio and the CD, and play computer games all at the same time. Trouble is, and I know I've said this before, I long for the good old days when the family went for a drive, maybe talked to each other or counted white horses. Well, I'll guarantee you one thing, you will not catch yours truly using this new technology. Well, maybe just this once. Anyway, that's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
One incident where back in '85, Pontiac wanted to upgrade the performance of the vehicle, but didn't know how, and what they did was they integrated a turbo with the 2.8 that originally came with the car. Unfortunately, the engine and the car outperformed the Corvette and Chevrolet said.
TSN's Motoring 2000 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.